magnetic points?
Yeah, so J.H. Bavinck is a missionary in Indonesia. He's dealing with all kinds of faiths. And he says, look, other religions are saying different things, but there seems to be a commonality. People seem to ask the same kinds of questions, or they wrestle with the same kinds of issues. And he calls them magnetic points. He says that they're points to which all humans are drawn. It's not that they consciously think about them, but the way they live their lives are expressions of answering those points. And he ties this back to what he calls a religious consciousness, that his understanding of Romans 1, that we're made in the image of God, we know God, and yet we suppress the truth and substitute it for idols, which is what Romans 1:18-32 talks about. So the kind of mixture of the image of God and idolatry is what he calls a religious consciousness. And what's interesting is he ties these magnetic points back to Romans 1:20, where Paul says, God has revealed his invisible qualities, his eternal power and divine nature. And Bavinck kind of expounds that and says there's a sense in which before the fall, we all knew that we were dependent upon God. We all knew that we were accountable to God. After the fall, we still know at some level we are creatures dependent upon something or someone, or that we're accountable to something or someone. But so that religiosity, as Paul says in Acts, I see you're very religious, has to come out somewhere. And my argument is, it doesn't simply come out in what we would traditionally call religion. It comes out in our humanity, even for people who don't call themselves religious. So the magnetic point, what I've tried to do in Making Faith Magnetic is Bavinck applies these magnetic points, and we'll come to what they actually are in a minute. And I just kind of transposed them or translated them to deal with your average secular Western person, to say they're as religious, they're answering the magnetic points in very non-traditional religious ways, but they're still answering the points, and that's our point of contact. They are as religious as we are, as anyone is. And so the magnetic points are these perspectives, these questions, 5 questions that all human beings have to deal with, that they live out in their lives.
Well, let's get to the questions then. So, and if I remember correctly, I want to make sure I get these right. You have totality, a way to connect, norm, a way to live, deliverance, a way out, destiny, a way to control, and a higher power, a way beyond. So
correct. Very good.
You give this illustration, though, that kind of sets the stage for this, which I actually thought was really interesting when you talk about the film of the climber at the
So Alex Honnold, an American climber who did this amazing film called Free Solo, where he climbs El Capitan in Yosemite Park without anything. He's an amazing guy. And
I don't know if amazing is the word I would use.
I didn't know anything about climbing, but I made my faculty and all my family watch it about 3 times. But in every climb, as you make people name, there's pitch. So climb's made up of pitches, different stages of the climb. And there's this bit of El Capitan called Free Blast, where it looks literally as if Alex Honnold's climbing glass. And it's only as the camera zooms in that you see these tiny little cracks and nubs that he's holding onto and creatively to climb up. And my point is that I think it feels at the moment for many of us in the West, as we try to talk to people about Christ, it feels as if we're just slipping down glass. Where do we get a hold of something? Where do we get purchase? And I think the Alex Honnold thing is interesting because he's able to get traction creatively. But the problem, and this is where the analogy kind of works and doesn't work, is that free climbing, there's a bit in the film where basically a number of his friends have died because they've just fallen down. So what we're looking to do as Christians is to get traction, but we want to be tethered. We need to be tethered. And of course, for those of us who are, evangelical Christians, that has to be tethered by God's word. I mean, there's no point in getting traction if we're not secured by what does the word say about human beings? What does the word say about how we connect? All of these things. So as a theologian, there's great method in starting with, well, what does the Bible say about human beings? And actually that's amazingly relevant because, the analysis of Bavinck is, let's go to those passages in Romans 1 which show us that people do know God, they suppress the truth, they substitute it, but that religiosity has to come out somewhere in everyone. And as I'd like to say, if your non-Christian friends and family, if they're human beings, then they will be expressing these magnetic points, but in very non-traditional ways. So that's where the traction bit comes in, because we should be able to connect with any point of a person's life, however much they say, don't talk to me about God, don't talk to me about Christ, don't talk to me about the Bible, I'm not coming to church. Their lives are expressions. They're answering these magnetic points because they're human beings. And that's where we have an opportunity to get the traction that we need.